They thought accepting that worthless cabin in the dead of winter would save them from freezing on the streets. But what Thaddeus and Corinne discovered hidden beneath the floorboards wasn't just shelter. It was $280 million in stolen art, and a secret powerful enough to change their lives forever or end them. Before we dive into the story, make sure to smash subscribe because tomorrow we have an extra special story for you that will blow your mind. The wind screamed through the pines like something wounded and dying, carrying snow that felt more like glass than water. Thaddeus gripped the steering wheel of their ancient Honda Civic, knuckles white, breath visible in the freezing air despite the heater running full blast. Beside him, Corinne sat wrapped in 3 layers, a quilted coat he'd bought her for their 30th anniversary, a wool sweater beneath, and a scarf wound tight around her neck. She stared straight ahead, jaw set, eyes dry. She'd stopped crying 2 days ago when their son Roland had said the words neither of them thought they'd ever hear. "You need to be out by Friday. I can't do this anymore." Thaddeus was 78 years old. Corinne was 76. They'd been married for 54 years, raised 3 children in a small house outside Billings, Montana, worked honest jobs their entire lives. Thaddeus had been a carpenter, Corinne a school librarian. They'd saved what they could, lived modestly, never asked for handouts, but when the medical bills came after Corinne's stroke 3 years ago, the savings vanished like smoke. The house went next, sold to cover debts they never imagined they'd carry. And Roland, their middle child, their only son still living nearby, had offered them a room. Not out of love, they realized now, but out of obligation. For 18 months, they'd lived in Roland's basement. A converted storage room with a space heater that barely worked, a twin bed they shared, and a single window that looked out at the garbage cans. Roland's wife, Shanice, never spoke to them directly, only through Roland, as if they were ghosts haunting her pristine suburban home. The grandchildren had been taught to avoid them. And slowly, meal by meal, comment by comment, Thaddeus and Corinne felt themselves disappearing. Then came the night Roland sat them down at the kitchen table and said he was refinancing. The house payment was going up. His daughter needed braces. Shanice wanted to redo the kitchen. "I'm sorry," he'd said, not meeting their eyes, "but you're going to have to find somewhere else." Thaddeus had asked, "When?" "End of the week," Roland replied. That had been 5 days ago. It was December. Temperatures were dropping below 0 at night. Every shelter within 50 miles was full. Social services had wait lists stretching into February. Corinne's Social Security check was $412 a month. Thaddeus got $630. Combined, they couldn't afford rent anywhere, not even a room. They'd called everyone they knew. Most numbers were disconnected. The few friends still alive were in nursing homes or barely surviving themselves. On Thursday morning, with nowhere left to turn, Thaddeus had driven them to the Office of Legal Aid. The woman behind the desk, exhausted and kind, had handed them a list of resources, none of which could help before the weekend. As they were leaving, an older woman in the waiting room overheard their situation. Her name was Nell. She'd been a nurse before retiring, lived alone now on the outskirts of Timber Falls, a town 2 hours north. "I know someone," she'd said quietly. "Man named Garrison. He owns property up near the forest line. Old cabin. Been empty for decades. It's not much, but he might let you stay there." Thaddeus had looked at Corinne. She'd nodded once. By Friday afternoon, they were sitting across from Garrison in a cluttered real estate office that smelled like burnt coffee and old paper. Garrison was maybe 60, thin as wire, with a face that had seen too much sun. He slid a single piece of paper across the desk. "It's yours if you want it," he said. "No rent. Just pay utilities when you can. Place has been sitting since 1979. Owner died. No heirs came forward. County was going to bulldoze it, but I bought the land cheap. Never got around to fixing it up." "What's the catch?" Thaddeus asked. Garrison shrugged. "No catch. It's rough. Roof probably leaks. No central heat. Well water. You'd be doing me a favor keeping squatters out." He paused, studying them. "Nell said you needed help. I'm helping." Corinne's voice was barely a whisper. "Why?" Garrison looked down at his hands. "My parents died homeless, froze to death under a bridge in Great Falls. I was 17, couldn't do anything about it." He met her eyes. "Maybe this balances something." Thaddeus signed the paper with a shaking hand. Garrison gave them a key, directions, and one strange warning. "Place has history. Don't go digging around too much. Some things are better left alone." They arrived at the cabin just as the sun was setting, the sky bruised purple and orange. The structure sat in a clearing, surrounded by towering pines, their branches heavy with snow. The cabin itself looked like it had been forgotten by time. Dark wood siding weathered to grey, a sagging porch, windows clouded with decades of dust. But it was standing. That was more than Thaddeus expected. He killed the engine. For a long moment, neither of them moved. Corinne finally broke the silence. "We've survived worse." "Have we?" Thaddeus asked. She turned to him, her weathered face soft in the fading light. "We survived losing Maggie. We survived your heart attack. We survived Roland's cruelty. We'll survive this." He took her hand, pressed it to his lips. "Together. Always." They stepped out into the cold. Thaddeus grabbed their 2 suitcases from the trunk, everything they owned in the world. Corinne carried a small box of kitchen supplies Nell had given them. The porch steps groaned under their weight. The key turned stiffly in the lock. The door opened with a long, protesting creak. Inside, the air was stale and cold, but dry. Thaddeus found a light switch. Miraculously, it worked. A single bare bulb illuminated a main room. Hardwood floors buried under dust, a stone fireplace, a small kitchen area with ancient appliances, a wooden table with 2 chairs. Doorways led to what looked like a bedroom and bathroom. It wasn't much, but it was shelter. Corinne set down her box and walked slowly through the space, her fingers trailing along the walls. Thaddeus watched her, his heart breaking and swelling at the same time. She'd been a beauty once, the kind that turned heads. Now her hair was white, her face lined, her hands gnarled with arthritis. But she moved through that broken-down cabin like a queen surveying her palace. "We can make this work," she said finally. Thaddeus nodded, not trusting his voice. They spent the first hour just trying to get warm. Thaddeus found firewood stacked against the back wall, dry and waiting. He built a fire in the stone fireplace, his hands remembering skills from his youth. Corinne unpacked their few possessions. Clothes, toiletries, a photo album, the quilt from their first apartment. She spread the quilt over the sagging couch near the fireplace. The fabric was worn thin, but it carried the memory of better days. As the fire caught and heat began to fill the room, they sat together on that couch, shoulders touching. Outside, the wind howled. Inside, the fire crackled. Neither spoke. Around 8 o'clock, Corinne heated 2 cans of soup on the ancient electric stove. It worked barely. They ate in silence at the wooden table, the soup warming them from the inside. When they finished, Thaddeus washed the bowls in the small sink. The water ran rust-colored for a minute before clearing. Everything in this place felt temporary, fragile, like it might collapse at any moment, just like them. That night, they lay together in the narrow bed in the back bedroom, piled under every blanket they owned. The mattress was old but intact. The room was freezing despite the fire in the main room. Corinne curled against Thaddeus, her body small and bird-like. He wrapped his arms around her. "I'm sorry," he whispered into her hair. "For what?" "For not protecting you, for not giving you better." She was quiet for a long time. Then, "Thaddeus, you've given me 54 years of better. One son's cruelty doesn't erase that. We're here, we're breathing, we're together. That's enough." But later, when he thought she was asleep, He heard her crying. Soft, nearly silent sobs she muffled into the pillow. He held her tighter and said nothing, because sometimes there are no words that can fix what's broken. Sometimes you just hold on and hope morning comes. Morning came cold and grey. Thaddeus woke to find Corinne already up, sweeping the main room with a broom she'd found in a closet. Dust clouds rose in the weak sunlight filtering through the windows. "You should rest," he said. "I've rested enough," she replied. "We need to make this place livable." And so they did. For 3 days they cleaned and repaired. Thaddeus's carpenter hands found purpose again, fixing loose boards, tightening hinges, patching small holes in the walls. Corinne scrubbed decades of grime from the windows until weak winter sunlight could actually penetrate the glass. They discovered the cabin was larger than it first appeared. The main room connected to the kitchen, which led to a back bedroom, a small bathroom, and a storage closet. But something felt off about the dimensions. Thaddeus, who'd built houses for 40 years, kept noticing inconsistencies. The exterior walls seemed thicker than they should be. The storage closet felt too shallow. On the 4th day, Nell arrived with supplies. She brought blankets, canned goods, a space heater, and her nephew Bridger, a quiet man in his 30s who helped Thaddeus reinforce the porch steps. While the men worked outside, Nell and Corinne sat by the fire drinking instant coffee. "How are you really?" Nell asked. Corinne stared into her cup. "We're surviving. That's more than I expected." "Garrison's a good man. He won't push you out." "Everyone's pushed us out eventually," Corinne said quietly. "Even our own son." Nell reached over and squeezed her hand. "Then maybe this cabin is where you stop getting pushed." After Nell and Bridger left, Corinne told Thaddeus what she'd said. He was standing in the kitchen, staring at the wall where he'd noticed another dimensional oddity. "Thad," she prompted. "This wall," he said, tapping it. "It's at least 8 inches thicker than the others. Why would anyone do that?" "Maybe insulation. In 1979. Nobody insulated like this back then." He pressed his ear against the wall, knocked. The sound was hollow. "There's space behind here." Corinne joined him. "What do you think it is?" "I don't know, but I'm curious." That night, Thaddeus couldn't sleep. The wall haunted him. He kept thinking about Garrison's warning. Don't go digging around too much. Why would he say that? What was there to find? Around 2 in the morning, he gave up on sleep, wrapped himself in a coat, and took his flashlight to investigate. He started in the storage closet, the one that felt too shallow. He measured the interior dimensions, then went outside in the freezing cold and measured the exterior. There was a 6-foot discrepancy, 6 feet of space that didn't exist. Back inside, he examined every inch of the closet walls. In the back corner, his fingers found something. A seam, so faint he'd missed it before. He pressed, and nothing happened. He pushed harder. Still nothing. Then, almost by accident, he twisted. Something clicked deep in the wall. A section of the back panel shifted inward an inch. His heart began to pound. He pulled, and the panel swung open on hidden hinges, revealing darkness beyond. Cold air rushed out, carrying a scent that was different from the rest of the cabin, drier, controlled. Thaddeus aimed his flashlight into the opening. Wooden steps led down into blackness. "Corinne," he called softly. She appeared in the doorway, wrapped in the quilt. "What is it?" He turned to her, his face pale in the flashlight beam. "I found something." She stepped closer, peering into the opening. "Is that a basement?" "I think so, but Garrison never mentioned a basement." They stood together in the doorway, staring down into the unknown. The steps looked solid, well-maintained even. That was the strangest part. Everything else in the cabin showed decades of neglect, but these steps looked almost new. "Should we go down?" Corinne asked. Thaddeus thought about Garrison's warning. He thought about every horror movie he'd ever seen. He thought about how sometimes curiosity gets people killed, but he also thought about how they had nothing left to lose. "Yes," he said, "but together." They descended slowly, Thaddeus leading with the flashlight, Corinne's hand gripping his shoulder. 12 steps down, they reached a concrete floor. Thaddeus swung the flashlight around. The space was enormous, easily 40 feet by 30 feet, and as the beam swept across the darkness, something glinted. Metal, glass, something else. He moved the flashlight back. His breath caught. Mounted on the wall was a panel of switches, modern switches, the kind with LED indicators. He flipped one. Nothing happened. He tried another. Suddenly, the entire space flooded with light. Motion sensor fluorescents flickered to life, one after another, revealing what had been hidden in the darkness. Both Thaddeus and Corinne gasped. The basement wasn't just a basement. It was a vault. The walls were lined with climate-controlled display cases, the kind you'd see in a museum. Inside the cases were paintings, sculptures, artifacts, jewelry, dozens of them, maybe hundreds. In the center of the room stood pedestals holding larger pieces. Against the far wall was a desk with what looked like a computer system, incredibly out of place in a cabin that hadn't had an occupant since the 70s. Corinne gripped Thaddeus's arm so hard her nails dug through his coat. "What is this?" "I don't know," he whispered. They moved deeper into the space like people walking through a dream. Thaddeus approached the first display case. Inside was a painting, maybe 2 feet by 3 feet, oil on canvas. The style looked familiar, impressionist maybe. A small placard beneath identified it. Claude Monet, Water Lily Study, 1897. Estimated value, $12 million. Thaddeus read it 3 times. Corinne moved to the next case. A sculpture, bronze, maybe a foot tall. The placard read, Auguste Rodin, The Thinker Study, 1903. Estimated value, $8.5 million. Her hand flew to her mouth. They moved faster now, case to case, their shock growing with each new discovery. Paintings by Renoir, Degas, Van Gogh. Sculptures they'd only seen in textbooks, jewelry that looked like it belonged to royalty. Ancient artifacts that should have been in museums, and every single piece had a placard with an estimated value. Thaddeus's legs gave out. He sat down hard on the concrete floor, his back against one of the pedestals. Corinne sank down beside him. They sat in silence, surrounded by impossible wealth, in a basement that shouldn't exist, in a cabin they'd accepted out of desperation. Finally, Corinne spoke, her voice barely audible. "How much do you think it's all worth?" Thaddeus shook his head. "I can't even begin to calculate." She pointed to the desk. "Maybe there's information over there." They helped each other stand and walked to the desk. It was solid oak, expensive looking, and on top sat a modern computer monitor, a keyboard, and several leather-bound journals. Thaddeus opened the first journal. The handwriting inside was neat, precise, masculine. "Collection log," the first page read. "Desmond Calloway." He flipped through pages. Each entry documented an acquisition. Where, when, how much, condition, provenance. The entries spanned decades, 1978 through 2019. Corinne leaned over his shoulder, reading along. Some acquisitions were straightforward purchases. Others had notes like, estate sale, no documentation, or private acquisition, origin unclear, or even more troubling, recovered previous owner deceased. "Thaddeus," Corinne said slowly, "I think some of these might be stolen." "I think all of these might be stolen," he replied. They found what they were looking for on the last page of the most recent journal. At the top, someone had written in shaky handwriting, "Final inventory, December 2019. Total pieces, 217. Total estimated value, $280 million. Corinne made a sound that was half laugh, half sob. Thaddeus just stared at the number, written out clearly. $280 million. That was more money than their entire extended family had earned in combined lifetimes. That was more than the GDP of some small countries. And it was sitting beneath their feet, in a basement under a cabin they'd been given for free because they were homeless. What happens next will turn this frozen night upside down, reveal a truth nobody expected, and remind us why sometimes the quietest voices carry the most power. Stay tuned to see what happens next. If you're enjoying the story, please like, share, and subscribe for more. They didn't sleep for the rest of the night. Instead, they sat at the small kitchen table upstairs, the journals spread before them, trying to understand what they'd stumbled into. Thaddeus read passages aloud while Corinne took notes on the back of an envelope. Desmond Calloway had been an art dealer, that much was clear, but not a legitimate one. His entries revealed a man who'd spent 40 years acquiring pieces through questionable means. Some he'd purchased legally from estates that didn't know what they had. Others he'd obtained through contacts in Europe, pieces that had disappeared during World War II or in the chaos of the Cold War. Still others seemed to have been outright stolen, though Calloway never explicitly admitted it. His final entries, written in a shaking hand in late 2019, were the most revealing. "I'm dying," one read. "Pancreatic cancer, stage 4. No family, no heirs. Spent my life accumulating beauty and hiding it from the world. What was the point? Maybe I was protecting these pieces. Maybe I was just a thief. I'll never know. The cabin is paid for through a trust. The collection will stay hidden until someone worthy finds it. Let fate decide." He died 3 months later, according to a death certificate tucked into the journal. The cabin had sat empty since. The property had eventually been sold for unpaid taxes. Garrison had bought it at auction, never knowing what was hidden beneath the floorboards. And now Thaddeus and Corinne, cast out by their own son, homeless and desperate, had become the accidental inheritors of the largest hidden art collection in modern history. "What do we do?" Corinne asked as dawn broke. Thaddeus rubbed his face. "I don't know. We can't keep it, can we?" "Legally, I don't think so. But we own the property. Doesn't that mean we own what's on it?" "I'm a carpenter, not a lawyer." Corinne stood and paced the small kitchen. "Some of these pieces were stolen from families, from museums. People are probably still looking for them." "But some were purchased legally," Thaddeus countered. "Calloway kept receipts for some of them." "So what? We sort through and decide which ones to return and which ones to keep." She laughed bitterly. "We can't even afford groceries. How are we supposed to navigate international art law?" Thaddeus pulled her close. "One step at a time. First, we need to verify this is real. Maybe it's all forgeries. Maybe Calloway was delusional." But even as he said it, he knew it wasn't true. Those paintings looked real. Those sculptures felt real. And that computer system, still powered, still running on some kind of backup generator they hadn't even known existed, suggested someone very serious had built this vault. The next 3 days were surreal. They maintained their normal routine on the surface, making simple meals, keeping the fire going, trying to stay warm. But their minds were constantly in that basement. Thaddeus spent hours studying the journals, trying to understand the scope of what they had. Corinne used the cabin's old computer to search for some of the pieces listed in the inventory. What she found terrified her. Several paintings were listed on Interpol's stolen art database. Others were marked as missing from private collections. A few were thought to have been destroyed decades ago. Each search result added another layer of complexity, another potential legal nightmare. One afternoon, Corinne was reading about a Monet that had been stolen from a family in Paris in 1944 when she heard a car engine. She looked out the window to see a black SUV pulling slowly up the long driveway. It stopped about 100 feet from the cabin, idling. She couldn't see the driver through the tinted windows. The vehicle sat there for maybe 5 minutes, engine running, before it slowly backed down the driveway and disappeared. Thaddeus came inside to find her pale and shaking. "Someone was watching the cabin," she said. "Are you sure?" "Positive. Black SUV, tinted windows. They just sat there." He moved to the window, but the vehicle was gone. "Maybe it was Garrison checking on us." "Garrison drives a pickup truck. Besides, why would he just sit there?" That night, Thaddeus walked the perimeter of the cabin with a flashlight. In the snow, he found fresh tire tracks, but he also found something else: footprints. Someone had walked up to the cabin windows and looked inside. The prints were recent, maybe an hour old. He followed them back to where the SUV had parked. Whoever it was had stood there, watching, before getting back in their vehicle. He went inside and locked the doors, something they hadn't bothered with before. Corinne was sitting by the fire, the journals in her lap. "We need to tell someone," she said. "Who?" "Nell. Bridger. Someone we trust." "And tell them what? That we found $250 million in stolen art under our cabin. Corinne, this could ruin us. We could be accused of being part of it." She closed the journal. "Or we could be honest. We could do the right thing." "The right thing might get us killed," Thaddeus said quietly. "Someone else knows about this collection. Whoever was in that SUV, they're watching us." They sat in heavy silence. Outside, the wind picked up, rattling the windows. Somewhere in the distance, a branch cracked under the weight of ice. Finally, Corinne stood. "I'm going to make tea. Then we're going to figure this out. Because I didn't survive Roland's cruelty and homelessness just to spend the rest of my life afraid." Thaddeus smiled despite everything. "That's my girl." While Corinne boiled water, Thaddeus returned to the basement one more time. He needed to see it again, to confirm it was real and not some hypothermia-induced hallucination. The lights flickered on as he descended. Everything was exactly as they'd left it. He walked slowly through the rows of cases, really looking at each piece now. A Van Gogh that museums believed had been destroyed in a fire. A Fabergé egg thought lost since the Russian Revolution. Roman artifacts from a dig that had mysteriously disappeared in the 1960s. Indigenous American pieces that should have been returned to tribes generations ago. Each item carried weight beyond monetary value. These were pieces of human history, creativity, cultural heritage. They didn't belong to Thaddeus and Corinne, but they also didn't belong hidden in a basement where no one could appreciate them. He reached the back wall and noticed something he'd missed before. A small door, maybe 3 feet high, almost hidden behind a larger display case. He moved the case aside, grunting with effort. The door had a simple latch. He opened it and found a small safe built into the wall. The safe was unlocked. Inside were documents, deeds, bills of sale, letters, and something that made his heart stop. A handwritten will. "Last Will and Testament of Desmond James Calloway," it read. Thaddeus carried it upstairs. Corinne was waiting with 2 cups of weak tea. He spread the will on the table between them. They read it together, Corinne's finger following the lines of careful script. The will was simple and devastating. Calloway left no heirs. The cabin and its contents were to be sold, with proceeds going to various art museums and indigenous cultural organizations. But there was a clause, handwritten and added at the bottom. "However, if this collection should be discovered by innocent parties who come to occupy this property through honest means, I leave it to their conscience. May they be wiser than I was. May they use these pieces for good, returning what was stolen, preserving what was saved, and finding redemption where I could not." Corinne's hand trembled as she set down her teacup. "He's asking us to do what he couldn't." "He's putting the burden on us," Thaddeus replied. "The decision, the risk, everything." "Maybe that's fair. We found it. We own the property." "Do we, though? Are we really equipped to handle this?" Corinne met his eyes. "No, but who is? Thad, we've lost everything. Our home, our savings, our dignity, our own son threw us out, but we've never lost our integrity. Maybe that's why we found this. Maybe that's what makes us worthy." Thaddeus wanted to argue, but he couldn't. Deep down, he knew she was right. They hadn't asked for this. But running from it or trying to profit from it quietly felt wrong. The pieces deserved better. The families who'd lost them deserved better. They deserved better. "We call Nell tomorrow," he said finally. "We trust Bridger to help us navigate this. We do it right." Corinne nodded. "We do it right." That night, they slept fitfully. Thaddeus dreamed of paintings coming alive, of stern-faced men in black suits demanding answers he didn't have. Corinne dreamed of Roland, of him finding out about the collection and trying to claim it, of lawyers and courtrooms and losing everything again. They woke before dawn, holding each other in the weak light. Outside, fresh snow had fallen, covering the tire tracks and footprints. For a moment, the world looked clean and new, like maybe they could start over. Thaddeus made instant coffee. Corinne found Nell's number and dialed with shaking fingers. The phone rang 4 times before Nell answered, her voice thick with sleep. "Hello?" "Nell, it's Corinne. I'm sorry to call so early, but we need help." There was a pause. "What's wrong? Are you okay?" "We're fine, physically. But we found something in the cabin, something impossible. Can you come and bring Bridger?" "I'll be there in 2 hours." Corinne hung up. Thaddeus was staring out the window at the snow-covered pines. "No going back now," he said. "No," she agreed. "No going back." They spent the next 2 hours cleaning the cabin, as if Nell and Bridger were royalty coming to visit. Corinne even found wildflowers frozen in the snow and brought them inside, setting them in a mason jar on the table. It was absurd, preparing for guests when they were about to reveal a secret that could upend their lives, but it gave them something to do besides panic. At exactly 8:30, they heard vehicles coming up the drive. 2 this time, Nell's old station wagon and Bridger's pickup. The couple stood on the porch as their visitors climbed out, breath fogging in the cold air. Nell took one look at their faces and knew something monumental had happened. "Show us," she said simply. Thaddeus led them inside through the kitchen to the storage closet. He opened the hidden panel. Nell's eyes widened. Bridger, the quiet nephew who rarely showed emotion, actually gasped. "There's a basement." "There's more than a basement," Corinne said. They descended together, and when the lights came on, when the full scope of the collection revealed itself, Nell had to sit down on the steps. Bridger walked forward slowly, his expression transforming from shock to disbelief to something like awe. He approached the first display case, read the placard, and turned back to Thaddeus and Corinne. "Please tell me you understand what this is," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "We think so," Thaddeus replied. Bridger moved through the space like a man in a trance, reading placards, examining pieces. When he reached the desk and saw the journals, he spent 10 minutes reading before he spoke again. "This is the Calloway collection," he said finally. "You know about it?" Corinne asked. "Everyone in the art world knows about it. Desmond Calloway was a legend. He disappeared in the late 70s, supposedly died in Europe. People have been searching for his collection for decades. Rumors said it was worth hundreds of millions. Most people thought it was a myth." He turned to face them, his expression serious. "You own the property?" "Yes," Thaddeus said. "Legally. Garrison sold it to us." "Does Garrison know about this?" "No, we don't think so." Bridger nodded slowly, his mind clearly racing. Okay, here's what we're dealing with. You're in possession of what might be the largest cache of stolen and missing art ever discovered. Some of these pieces have been sought by museums, governments, and private collectors for generations. You could be heroes for returning them. Or you could be prosecuted as accomplices if anyone thinks you knew about this before buying the property. The weight of his words settled over them like snow. Nell stood and walked over to Corinne, taking her hands. "What do you want to do?" Corinne looked at Thaddeus. They'd been married long enough to communicate without words. His slight nod told her everything. "We want to do the right thing," Corinne said. "Return what was stolen, honor what was saved, maybe keep enough to live with dignity. We don't want to be rich. We just don't want to be homeless anymore." Bridger pulled out his phone. "I need to make some calls. Lawyers, art experts, maybe the FBI. This is beyond anything I've handled." He paused. "But if you're serious about doing this honestly, I'll help you. It's going to be complicated. It's going to take time. And there are going to be people who try to take advantage of you." "People have been taking advantage of us our whole lives," Thaddeus said quietly. "At least this time, we have something worth fighting for." They went back upstairs. Nell made more coffee while Bridger started making calls from the porch. Thaddeus and Corinne sat together on the couch near the fire, wrapped in the old quilt. "Are we making a mistake?" Corinne whispered. "Probably," Thaddeus replied. "But it's an honest mistake. That's more than we can say about most things lately." Through the window, they watched Bridger pacing, his breath visible, phone pressed to his ear. Nell brought them coffee and sat in the worn armchair across from them. "You're brave," she said. "Most people would try to sell this quietly." "We're not brave," Corinne said. "We're just tired of being afraid." Outside, the sun finally broke through the clouds, sending beams of light through the snow-heavy branches. The cabin, so dark and desperate just days ago, suddenly felt full of possibility. Not because of the fortune hidden beneath their feet, but because they'd chosen integrity over survival. They'd chosen truth over fear. Whatever came next, they would face it together, just as they always had, just as they always would. Bridger's first call lasted 23 minutes. Thaddeus and Corinne watched through the window as he paced the snow-covered driveway, his free hand gesturing emphatically. When he finally came back inside, his face was flushed from cold and something else, excitement mixed with concern. He set his phone on the table and pulled up a chair. "Okay," he said, rubbing his hands together. "I just spoke with Margaret Thorne. She's an art recovery specialist based in Chicago, handles repatriation cases internationally. I didn't give her details, just asked hypothetically about a major discovery." He paused. "She wants to fly out tomorrow." "Tomorrow?" Corinne's voice cracked. "That's too fast." "This is moving whether we're ready or not," Bridger said gently. "The moment we start verification, word will spread. The art world is smaller than you think. We need to control the narrative before someone else does." Nell refilled everyone's coffee. "What does that mean, control the narrative?" "It means we document everything. We establish that Thaddeus and Corinne had no knowledge of the collection before purchasing the property. We show good faith by immediately seeking expert help. We position them as honest people doing the right thing, not opportunists or thieves." Bridger looked at the elderly couple. "Because I promise you, there will be people who try to paint you as the latter." Thaddeus felt something cold settle in his chest. "We're victims in this. We were homeless. I know that, you know that, but there are museums that have been searching for some of these pieces for decades. There are insurance companies that paid out millions in claims. There are families who lost heirlooms. When they find out a homeless couple is sitting on their property, some of them won't care about your circumstances. They'll just want what's theirs." Bridger's voice softened. "I'm not trying to scare you. I'm trying to prepare you. This is going to get complicated fast." Corinne stood and walked to the window. Outside, chickadees hopped through the snow-laden branches, oblivious to the storm brewing inside the cabin. "What if we just walked away?" she said quietly. "What if we just left, let someone else discover it?" "You can't unknow what you know," Nell said, "and running would make you look guilty." "Of what? We didn't steal anything." "No, but you found it, and legally, that creates obligations." Bridger pulled out a yellow legal pad. "Look, Here's what I think we should do. Tonight, we document everything ourselves. Photos, video, detailed inventory. Tomorrow, when Margaret arrives, we have a professional assessment. Within 48 hours, we contact the FBI's art crime team. We turn this over to authorities and let them sort out ownership. And what happens to us? Thaddeus asked. Where do we live while all this gets sorted out? You stay here. You legally own this property. No one can remove you. Bridger met his eyes. But you need to understand something. Once the FBI gets involved, this cabin becomes a crime scene. You'll have agents here, maybe for weeks. Your life won't be your own for a while. The four of them sat in heavy silence. The fire popped, sending sparks up the chimney. Outside, the day was bright and cold and deceptively peaceful. Finally, Thaddeus reached for Corinne's hand. We've made it this far, he said. We'll make it through whatever comes next. They spent the afternoon in the basement vault. Bridger had brought a professional camera and video equipment from his truck. He documented everything. Wide shots of the entire space, close-ups of each piece, detailed recordings of every placard. Thaddeus read from the journals while Bridger filmed. Corinne created a spreadsheet on the computer, entering each piece, its listed value, and any notes about provenance. The work was painstaking and surreal. Every few minutes someone would stop and just stare at something. A sculpture that belonged in the Louvre, a painting that should have been hanging in the Met, jewelry that had once adorned Russian nobility. The scale of what they were documenting was incomprehensible. Nell, who'd remained upstairs making sandwiches and keeping watch, called down around 3 in the afternoon. There's a car coming. Everyone froze. Bridger set down the camera. Expecting anyone? No, Thaddeus said. They climbed the stairs quickly and moved to the front windows. A silver sedan was making its way up the long driveway, moving slowly, cautiously. It wasn't Garrison's truck. It wasn't anyone they recognized. The car stopped in front of the cabin. For a long moment, nothing happened. Then the driver's door opened and a woman stepped out. She was maybe 50, dressed in an expensive wool coat, her dark hair pulled back severely. She stood beside her car, studying the cabin like she was appraising it. Then she reached into her coat pocket. Thaddeus tensed, but she only pulled out a business card. She walked to the porch and knocked, 3 sharp, authoritative raps. Thaddeus opened the door but didn't invite her in. Up close, he could see her eyes were calculating, cold. "Can I help you?" he asked. "I'm looking for the property owner," she said. Her voice was smooth, professional, with an accent he couldn't place. Eastern European, maybe. "That would be me. Mr. Thaddeus Monroe." The fact that she knew his full name made his blood run cold. "Who are you?" She handed him the business card. It read, Katerina Volkov, Private Acquisitions Specialist. No company name, just a phone number and email address. "I represent certain collectors who have an interest in this property. The property isn't for sale." "Everything is for sale, Mr. Monroe." Her smile didn't reach her eyes. "I understand you recently acquired this cabin. I'm prepared to offer you $50,000, cash for immediate transfer of the deed." Bridger appeared in the doorway behind Thaddeus. "Who are you representing?" Katerina's gaze shifted to him, measuring. "Private clients, confidential." "The property isn't for sale," Bridger said firmly. "Please leave." 60,000, Katerina countered. "I can have the money here tomorrow." "No," Thaddeus said. "Thank you for your interest, but we're not selling." Katerina's expression hardened slightly. "Mr. Monroe, you don't understand what you're dealing with. There are people who have been watching this property for a very long time, people who understand its true value. You would be wise to accept my offer and walk away while you still can." "Is that a threat?" Bridger stepped fully onto the porch now. "It's advice." Katerina pulled out another card and set it on the porch railing. "When you change your mind, call me. But don't wait too long. My client's patience is limited." She walked back to her car with measured steps, got in, and drove away slowly, as if she had all the time in the world. Thaddeus picked up the card. His hands were shaking. Nell appeared with Corinne, who'd been listening from inside. "Who was that?" Corinne asked. "Trouble," Bridger said. He pulled out his phone. "I'm calling Margaret Thorne right now. We don't have until tomorrow. We need help today." While Bridger made his call, Thaddeus and Corinne sat at the kitchen table, staring at Katerina Volkov's business card like it was a snake. "How did she know?" Corinne whispered. "How did she know your full name? No, we just bought this place." "Property records are public," Nell said, but her voice lacked conviction. "Anyone could look that up." "But why would they?" Thaddeus countered. "Unless they already knew something was here." He stood and moved to the window, watching the road. "Garrison said this place had been empty for decades. But what if it hasn't been? What if people have been watching it, waiting?" Bridger returned, his face grim. "Margaret can't get here until tomorrow morning, earliest flight. But I also called a friend who's a retired FBI agent. He's making some inquiries, off the record." He looked at Katerina's card. "Did she say anything else? Any specific threats?" "Just that we should take her offer while we can," Thaddeus said. $60,000 to walk away from property we paid nothing for. Makes you wonder why." "Because what's hidden here is worth thousands of times that," Bridger said quietly. "And now they know you've found it." "How?" Corinne demanded. "How would they know?" "The computer system," Nell said suddenly. Everyone turned to look at her. "You said there's a computer down there. What if it's connected to something? What if someone's been monitoring it remotely?" Bridger was already moving toward the basement. They all followed. In the vault, he went straight to the desk and examined the computer setup more carefully. It was a modern system, maybe 5 years old, completely out of place in a cabin that supposedly hadn't been occupied since 1979. He checked the back of the tower. Cables ran through a hole drilled in the floor. "It's hardwired to something," he said. "Probably internet via buried cable or satellite." He moved the mouse and the monitor came to life, showing a login screen. Whoever set this up had remote access. If you've been turning on lights, using the system, they would know. "But we only found this 4 days ago," Thaddeus protested. "And Katerina Volkov showed up today. That's not a coincidence." Bridger straightened. "Here's what I think happened. Desmond Calloway built this vault and set up monitoring. When he died, someone else kept that monitoring active. Probably the same people Katerina represents. They've been waiting for someone to discover it." "Why wait?" Corinne asked. "Why not just take it themselves?" "Because legally they can't," Bridger explained. "If they knew about stolen art and took it, they'd be prosecuted. But if someone else discovers it, claims it through legal property ownership, and then sells it to them, that creates separation, plausible deniability." The implications settled over them like a weight. Thaddeus moved to one of the display cases holding a small Vermeer. "So what do? We document everything tonight. We don't touch the computer again. And tomorrow, when Margaret arrives, we show her everything and then immediately contact authorities." Bridger paused. "And tonight, none of you stay here alone. I'm staying. Nell, you should too." "I'll make dinner," Nell said quietly. They worked until well after dark, finishing the documentation. By the time they climbed the stairs for the last time that evening, they had over 300 photographs, 2 hours of video, and a complete spreadsheet inventory. The total they'd calculated matched Calloway's journal estimate, 217 pieces valued at approximately $280 million. Corinne made spaghetti with sauce from a jar. They ate mostly in silence, exhaustion and tension stealing their appetite. Afterward, Bridger set up watch positions. He would take the first shift, sitting by the front window with his phone. Thaddeus would relieve him at 2 in the morning. Nell insisted on sleeping on the couch near the fire. "I haven't had an adventure in 20 years, she said. "I'm not missing this." Thaddeus and Corinne retired to the small bedroom. They lay in the darkness, neither sleeping, listening to the old cabin creak and settle. "I'm scared," Corinne finally whispered. "Me too. What if we're making a mistake? What if we should have just taken that woman's offer and run?" Thaddeus rolled to face her, though he could barely see her in the darkness. "Running is what we've been doing our whole lives. Running from debt, from medical bills, from our son's cruelty. I'm tired of running. This is our chance to stand for something. Or get crushed trying. Maybe, but at least we'll go down with our integrity intact." He found her hand under the blankets. "Whatever happens, we face it together." "Always," she whispered back. Around 1 in the morning, Thaddeus woke to voices. He got up quietly and found Bridger at the kitchen table with his laptop open. "Couldn't sleep?" Thaddeus asked. "Found something you need to see?" Bridger turned the laptop. On the screen was a news article from 2014. The headline read, "Private collector murdered, priceless art missing." The article detailed the death of a man named Viktor Sokolov, a Russian billionaire who'd been found dead in his London apartment. Police suspected it was tied to his art collection, which had included several pieces of questionable provenance. "So?" Thaddeus said. Bridger scrolled to a photo embedded in the article. It showed investigators removing items from the apartment. In the background, barely visible, was a woman. She had her back to the camera, but her dark hair and build looked familiar. "I think that's Katerina Volkov," Bridger said. "Or someone who looks a lot like her." "You think she killed him?" "I think she works for people who don't hesitate to kill when money and art are involved." Bridger closed the laptop, "which is why we need to be very, very careful." They traded shifts. Thaddeus sat by the window, watching the moonlit snow, jumping at every sound. A branch breaking under ice sounded like footsteps. The wind against the windows sounded like someone trying to get in. By the time grey dawn arrived, he was exhausted and wired, running on adrenaline and bad coffee. Margaret Thorne arrived at 9:30. She drove a rental SUV and climbed out, carrying a large aluminum case. She was 60-something, with steel grey hair and sharp eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses. Bridger had warned them she was brilliant and intimidating in equal measure. She proved him right immediately. "Show me," she said, skipping introductions. They led her to the basement. When the lights came on and she saw the scope of the collection, she stopped on the bottom step. For a full minute, she said nothing. Then, "Holy Mother of God." She moved through the space like a surgeon, examining each piece with a practiced eye. From her case, she produced tools, magnifying glasses, UV lights, chemical swabs. She checked signatures, examined canvas weaves, studied brush strokes. She spent nearly an hour on a single painting, a small Degas of ballet dancers. Finally, she straightened and turned to the group watching her. "This is real," she said simply. "All of it. I've examined 20 pieces so far. Every single one is authentic." "How can you be sure?" Corinne asked. "I've spent 40 years studying art forgery. I know what to look for. Aging patterns, pigment composition, canvas material. These pieces are genuine." She moved to the desk and opened the journals. She read silently for several minutes. "Desmond Calloway," she said finally. "I should have known. We've been looking for this collection for decades." "We?" Thaddeus asked. "The international art recovery community. Calloway was a legend. Brilliant, unethical, untraceable. He'd acquire pieces that museums couldn't or wouldn't buy. Some legally, many not. Then he'd disappear." She looked up. "We always suspected he had a vault somewhere, but we never imagined it would be in Montana." "What happens now?" Bridger asked. Margaret closed the journal. "Now we contact the FBI, specifically their art crime team. They'll secure the site, verify everything I've found, and begin the process of returning pieces to their rightful owners." She looked at Thaddeus and Corinne. "You understand you're unlikely to keep any of this?" "We don't want to keep it," Corinne said. We just want to do the right thing." "Then you're rarer than any painting in this vault." Margaret pulled out her phone. "I'm making the call now. Within hours, this place will be swarming with federal agents. Are you prepared for that?" Thaddeus looked at Corinne. She nodded. "Make the call," he said. The FBI arrived at 2:15 that afternoon, 3 black SUVs, followed by a large van. Agent Victoria Morse led the team, a woman in her 40s with dark skin, intelligent eyes, and an air of absolute authority. She gathered everyone in the cabin's main room while her team began setting up equipment outside. "Mr. and Mrs. Monroe," she began, "I want to be very clear about your situation. You are not under investigation at this time, but you are witnesses in what may be the largest art recovery case in FBI history. That means your lives are going to be disrupted significantly." "We understand," Thaddeus said. "I don't think you do." Agent Morse sat down across from them. "When word gets out about this discovery, you're going to be famous. Media will camp on your doorstep. Lawyers will come crawling out of the woodwork. People will offer you money, threaten you, befriend you just to get close to this collection. Your privacy is over." Corinne felt tears prick her eyes. "We were just trying to survive winter." Agent Morse's expression softened slightly. "I know. I've read your file. What your son did was cruel, but you've stumbled into something much bigger now. We're going to do everything we can to protect you, but you need to trust us, completely." "Can we stay in the cabin?" Thaddeus asked. "For now, yes, but we'll have agents here around the clock, and you cannot speak to anyone about this case. No friends, no family, definitely no media. If someone approaches you, you direct them to me." She handed them business cards. "Call this number anytime, day or night." Over the next 4 hours, the cabin transformed. Agents in windbreakers marked FBI moved with efficient purpose. Crime scene tape went up around the property perimeter. Lights and generators were set up. A communication tent appeared near the driveway. Margaret Thorne worked alongside the federal agents, her expertise guiding their documentation. She'd been right. This was real, significant, and about to change everything. What happens next will test this couple's resolve like never before, reveal secrets that shake an entire community, and prove that sometimes doing the right thing costs more than anyone imagines. Stay tuned to see what unfolds. If you're gripped by this story, please like, share, and subscribe for more incredible true tales. By evening, the basement vault looked like something from a crime procedural. Evidence markers stood beside each display case. Cameras on tripods recorded from multiple angles. Specialists in white gloves carefully examined pieces, while others took samples for forensic analysis. Thaddeus and Corinne sat on their couch, feeling like strangers in their own home, watching their cabin become a federal crime scene. Around 7, a younger agent brought them sandwiches from town. "Agent Morse wanted to make sure you ate something," she said kindly. Her name tag read, Henderson. "This must be overwhelming." "That's one word for it," Corinne said. Henderson sat down in the armchair. "For what it's worth, what you're doing is incredibly brave. Most people would have tried to sell some of these pieces quietly. You chose the hard right over the easy wrong." "Doesn't feel brave," Thaddeus muttered. "Feels terrifying." "Courage usually does." Henderson smiled. "Agent Morse wanted me to brief you on what happens next. Tomorrow morning, we'll hold a press conference. We're going to announce the discovery without revealing the exact location yet. That buys us some time to secure the site fully. But within 48 hours, everyone will know your names." "Can't you keep us anonymous?" Corinne asked. "Legally, we could, but practically it won't work. Property records are public. Journalists are good at their jobs. Someone will figure it out." Henderson paused. "However, we can control the narrative. We can make sure the story told is true, that you're victims who became heroes." "We're not heroes," Thaddeus said again. You are to the families who'll get their stolen property back, to the museums that can finally complete their collections, to everyone who believes in doing the right thing even when it's hard. Henderson stood. Try to get some rest. Tomorrow starts early. But rest was impossible. Thaddeus and Corinne lay in bed, listening to footsteps overhead, voices in the yard, generators humming. Their quiet cabin in the woods had become Grand Central Station. Around midnight, Corinne whispered, "Do you regret it?" "Regret what?" "Opening that door, going down into the basement. We could have just lived here, never knowing what was underneath." Thaddeus thought about it. "No," he said finally. "I don't regret it. Knowing something exists creates responsibility. We couldn't unknow it. And living on top of stolen art, keeping that secret, would have poisoned us eventually." "Even if it destroys us?" "Even then." He pulled her close. "We've survived everything else. We'll survive this." The next morning came too fast. Thaddeus woke to find Agent Morse at their kitchen table typing on a laptop. Bridger and Nell had stayed in a motel in Timber Falls, but arrived early, bringing fresh coffee and pastries. "The press conference is at 10, Agent Morse announced. "You don't have to attend, but I'd recommend it. If you're there, you can see how the story is framed. Plus, it shows you have nothing to hide." "What do we say if reporters ask us questions?" Corinne asked. "You don't say anything. I'll handle questions. You just stand there looking honest and decent." Agent Morse smiled slightly. "Which shouldn't be hard since you are." They drove to the press conference in an FBI SUV, Bridger and Nell following in their own vehicles. The location was the Timber Falls Community Center, chosen because it was neutral ground and could accommodate media. When they arrived, Thaddeus couldn't believe the turnout. News vans from every major network lined the parking lot, satellite trucks with extended antennas, reporters in makeup checking their cameras. "This is insane," he muttered. "This is $280 million, Agent Morse replied. "It's a slow news week. You're the story." Inside, a podium had been set up with FBI logos. Chairs for media filled the room. Agent Morse directed Thaddeus and Corinne to seats behind the podium, slightly off to the side. "Just sit there. Look calm. Don't react to anything I say." At exactly 10 o'clock, Agent Morse approached the podium. Cameras flashed like lightning. She waited for quiet, then began. "Good morning. I'm Special Agent Victoria Morse with the FBI's Art Crime Team. Yesterday, we secured what we believe to be the largest cache of stolen and missing artwork recovered in United States history." The room exploded with noise. Agent Morse waited it out. The collection was discovered by private citizens who purchased property in rural Montana without knowledge of what was hidden there. Upon discovery, they immediately contacted authorities. "We're currently in the process of authenticating and cataloging approximately 200 pieces valued at over $250 million. Reporters shouted questions, but Agent Morse continued. "Among the recovered items are paintings by Monet, Renoir, Degas, and Van Gogh, sculptures by Rodin, numerous artifacts thought lost or destroyed. Many of these pieces have been missing for decades. Some were stolen during World War II. Others disappeared in more recent thefts. We're working with Interpol and international partners to identify rightful owners." "Who found it?" a reporter yelled. Agent Morse gestured to Thaddeus and Corinne. "Thaddeus and Corinne Monroe, residents of Montana. They purchased the property legally and disclosed the discovery voluntarily. They are witnesses, not suspects, and we commend their integrity." Cameras swung toward the elderly couple. Flashes exploded. Thaddeus felt Corinne's hand grip his. He stared straight ahead, trying to look dignified while his heart raced. "Will they profit from the discovery?" another reporter called. "That will be determined through legal proceedings. Our focus now is authentication and repatriation. This investigation is ongoing. We won't be taking questions at this time. Thank you. Agent Morse stepped away from the podium as reporters erupted with more questions. Agents escorted Thaddeus and Corinne out through a back door to the waiting SUV. As they drove away, Thaddeus could see news helicopters circling overhead. "It started," Nell said from the back seat. "There's no stopping it now." She was right. By evening, their faces were on every news channel. Homeless couple discovers fortune. From broke to billions, the Montana art miracle. Elderly heroes return stolen masterpieces. The coverage was mostly positive, painting them as honest people doing good. But not all of it was kind. Some commentators questioned their motives. Others suggested they should receive a substantial finder's fee. Talk show hosts made them punchlines. Social media exploded with opinions from people who'd never met them. Back at the cabin, now surrounded by security, Thaddeus turned off the small TV. "I can't watch anymore." Corinne was reading comments on Nell's tablet. "People are saying we're fools for not keeping it, that we're too stupid to deserve it." "People are idiots," Nell said, taking the tablet away. "You did the right thing. That's all that matters." But doing the right thing had consequences. Over the next week, those consequences mounted. Lawyers began calling, offering to represent them in claims to portions of the collection. Reporters camped outside the security perimeter, trying to get interviews. Strangers sent letters, some praising them, others condemning them, a few threatening them. And most painful of all, Roland called. He'd seen the news. "You found millions in art and didn't tell me?" he'd shouted over the phone. "We found it after you threw us out," Thaddeus had replied coldly. "I'm your son. I have legal rights. You have nothing. You gave up your rights when you cast us into the snow." Thaddeus had hung up. Roland called back 6 times. Thaddeus blocked his number. The authentication process continued. Experts flew in from around the world. Each piece was photographed, X-rayed, chemically analyzed. Databases were searched. Families were contacted. Museums made claims. Governments filed paperwork. The legal complexities multiplied daily. And through it all, Thaddeus and Corinne lived in their cabin, surrounded by federal agents, cut off from normal life. Their world reduced to that small space and the impossible secret beneath it. One night, 3 weeks after the discovery, Agent Morse sat with them after her team had finished for the day. "I want you to know something," she said. "In my 20 years with the Bureau, I've seen a lot of people faced with similar situations. Collectors who inherit stolen art, dealers who discover forgeries, families who find loot from old heists. Almost none of them do what you did. They try to keep it, sell it, hide it. You're extraordinary." "We're just tired old people who got lucky," Corinne said. "No," Agent Morse corrected gently. "You're decent people who got tested, and you passed. That matters more than you know." After she left, Thaddeus and Corinne sat by the dying fire. Outside, security lights illuminated the snow. Inside, they were warm, safe, and terrified. "Where do we go from here?" Corinne asked. "Forward," Thaddeus said. "It's the only direction left." Spring arrived slowly in Montana, but it arrived. The snow began to melt in patches, revealing brown grass and the first brave shoots of green. But inside the cabin, the season didn't matter. Thaddeus and Corinne were living in a different kind of winter, one made of legal documents, endless questions, and a circus that never stopped. By early March, 6 weeks after the press conference, the authentication was complete. Margaret Thorne and her team had verified every single piece. 217 items, all genuine, all significant. The total verified value had actually increased, $283 million. The number was so large, it lost meaning. It was just syllables, just sounds. But what gave those sounds weight were the stories behind each piece. The Vermeer that had been stolen from a Jewish family in Amsterdam in 1943, hidden by Nazis, lost for 80 years. The Degas that disappeared from a Paris museum in 1998, the night watchman murdered, the case gone cold. The indigenous pottery taken from a Pueblo tribe in 1927 by an archaeologist who claimed he'd purchased it legally, except the tribe had never agreed to sell their sacred pieces. Every item carried grief, theft, loss. And now, one by one, those losses could be corrected. The claims came flooding in. Museums filed formal requests with authentication documents. Families hired lawyers and genealogists to prove ownership. Insurance companies that had paid out claims decades ago argued they owned the pieces now. Governments demanded return of national treasures, and some claims were fraudulent, people seeing an opportunity, forging documents, lying about connections to original owners. Sorting through it all became a monumental task. Agent Morse's team grew to 15 people. They worked out of a temporary office set up in Timber Falls, reviewing claims, verifying documentation, navigating international law. And every decision had to account for Thaddeus and Corinne's legal position as property owners. "You have rights," Bridger explained during one of their many meetings. He'd essentially become their full-time advocate, taking leave from his regular job. "You legally own the property where these items were found. That creates a claim. Not to everything, but to something." "We don't want to profit from stolen art," Corinne said for the 100th time. "I know, but the law isn't that simple. Some pieces were purchased legally by Callaway. Some have no clear ownership after decades. Some are covered by statutes of limitations. There's going to be money left over, and legally, some of it is yours." Thaddeus rubbed his tired eyes. "How much?" "We won't know for months, maybe years, but conservatively, several $1,000,000. The number should have brought relief. Instead, it brought more stress. Suddenly they weren't just homeless people doing the right thing, they were potentially wealthy people, and that changed how the world saw them. The media coverage shifted. Early stories had praised their integrity. Now some outlets questioned their motives. Did they know what they were buying? One article asked. Were they really that naive? Another suggested they'd researched the property's history before purchasing, implying premeditation. None of it was true, but truth didn't stop speculation. And then Roland escalated. In early April, he filed a lawsuit claiming he had rights to any proceeds as Thaddeus and Corinne's son. His argument? They'd been living with him when they purchased the property, so he'd indirectly facilitated the discovery. It was absurd, offensive, and legally baseless, but it still required a response, which meant more lawyers, more court dates, more stress. "I want to see him," Corinne announced one morning. "What?" Thaddeus looked up from the breakfast table. "Roland, I want to see him, face to face." "Absolutely not." "He's our son, Thad. Our son. Whatever he's done, we raised him. We loved him. I need to understand how he became this person." Bridger, who was present for the conversation, shook his head. "Legally, I'd advise against it. Anything you say could be used in his lawsuit." "I don't care about his lawsuit," Corinne said firmly. "I care about closure." So they arranged it. A meeting at Bridger's office in Timber Falls, neutral ground. Roland arrived with his lawyer, a slick man in an expensive suit. Roland himself looked terrible, thinner, older, his eyes hollow. When he saw his parents, something flickered across his face. Shame, maybe, or calculation. "Mom, Dad." "Roland," Corinne said evenly. They sat across a conference table like strangers negotiating a business deal. Roland's lawyer began with pleasantries, but Corinne cut him off. "Why?" she asked Roland directly. "Why are you doing this?" Roland shifted in his chair. "You're about to be millionaires. I'm your son. I should benefit." "You threw us out," Thaddeus said, his voice hard, "into winter. We were homeless because of you." "I made a mistake." "You made a choice," Corinne interrupted. "You chose your comfort over your parents, and now you choose money over dignity. When did you become so small?" The words hit like a slap. Roland's lawyer jumped in. "My client is entitled." "Your client is entitled to nothing," Bridger said coldly. "He's not a dependent. He provided no financial support. He has no legal claim to property his parents purchased after he evicted them. This lawsuit is harassment, and we're filing a countersuit for emotional distress." Roland finally looked at his parents. Really looked. What he saw seemed to break something in him. "I'm drowning," he said quietly. "The house is underwater. Shanice left me. The kids won't talk to me. I lost my job. I'm drowning, and I thought this could save me." "So you'd drown us to save yourself?" Corinne asked. "I don't know what else to do." Thaddeus leaned forward. "Here's what you do. You drop this lawsuit. You leave us alone, and you figure out how to be a better man than you've been, because we're done catching you when you fall." "But you're my parents." "We were your parents. We'll always be that in blood. But in actions, you stopped being our son when you stopped acting like one." Thaddeus stood. "We're finished here." They walked out, leaving Roland sitting at that conference table, his expensive lawyer shuffling papers, his life in pieces. Corinne cried in the car. Not for Roland, but for the boy he'd been, the man they'd hoped he'd become. "Did we do that to him?" she asked. "Did we raise him to be like this?" "No," Thaddeus said firmly. "We raised him to be better. He chose different." The lawsuit was dropped 2 days later. Roland disappeared from their lives completely. Thaddeus heard later that he'd moved to Oregon, working construction, trying to rebuild. They didn't reach out. Some bridges, once burned, aren't meant to be rebuilt. But while their sun receded, the rest of the world pressed closer. By May, the first pieces were ready for return. A small ceremony was organized in Chicago, where 3 paintings stolen from a Jewish family would be returned to their descendants. Thaddeus and Corinne were invited to attend. The family was there. 3 generations gathered in a museum conference room. The oldest woman, Sarah Levine, was 92. She'd been 10 years old when the Nazis came to her family's apartment in Amsterdam. She watched soldiers take paintings off the walls while her mother wept. "I never thought I'd see them again," Sarah said, tears streaming down her weathered face. "I thought they were gone forever." When the paintings were unveiled, she gasped. Her hands shook as she reached toward them but didn't touch, as if they might vanish. Her daughter stood beside her, weeping. Her grandson recorded everything on his phone, and Thaddeus and Corinne stood to the side, witnesses to healing they'd enabled. Afterward, Sarah approached them. She took both of Corinne's hands in hers. "You gave me back my mother's memory. These paintings hung in our home. I remember standing on a stool to see them better. Now my great-grandchildren will see them, will know we survived, will know our history didn't die with our family." "We just did what anyone should do," Corinne said. "But most people don't." Sarah pulled her into a gentle hug. "Thank you. Thank you for seeing us." They attended 4 more return ceremonies over the next month. Each one was emotional, exhausting, and profoundly meaningful. A Native American tribe received pottery and ceremonial objects, restoring pieces of their spiritual heritage. An Italian museum received a Renaissance sculpture. A French family received paintings their grandfather had hidden during the war, thinking he'd have time to retrieve them before he died in the camps. Each return was a small act of justice, decades delayed but finally delivered. And through it all, Thaddeus and Corinne were praised, interviewed, photographed. They became symbols of integrity in a cynical age. Strangers recognized them in town. People asked for autographs, which felt absurd. They were just tired old people who'd made one decent choice. But the world needed heroes, apparently, and had decided they'd do. The attention was overwhelming. More than once, Corinne had panic attacks in grocery stores, surrounded by people congratulating her. Thaddeus stopped going out except when necessary. They'd survived homelessness, only to become prisoners of their own unexpected fame. "I miss being invisible," Corinne said one evening. They were sitting on their small porch, watching the sunset. Security had finally been reduced to one agent at the property line. The FBI had removed most of the collection to secure facilities for distribution. Only a few pieces remained for final authentication. Soon the cabin would truly be theirs again. "Me too," Thaddeus admitted. "But we can't go back, only forward." "To what, though? What's our life now?" It was Agent Morse who provided an answer. She came to the cabin one morning in late June with paperwork and a proposal. "The legal proceedings are wrapping up," she explained. 93 pieces have clear ownership and will be returned. 47 are being claimed by museums with legitimate provenance. 21 are covered by insurance claims. That leaves 56 pieces with unclear or impossible to determine ownership. "What happens to those?" Bridger asked. "Normally they'd go to auction and the proceeds would go to the property owner, you. But we have another option." Agent Morse pulled out a thick document. Several parties have proposed establishing a foundation. The pieces with unclear ownership would be placed in museums on permanent loan. The foundation would receive a percentage of admission fees and licensing. That revenue would fund art education, support theft recovery efforts, and provide grants for repatriation research. "And we'd run this foundation?" Thaddeus asked. "You'd be on the board, but we'd hire professional management. This isn't about making you wealthy. It's about creating lasting good from Calloway's crimes." Agent Morse paused. "You'd also receive compensation, a finder's fee, essentially. $15 million. The number hung in the air like something physical. Corinne laughed, a sound with no humor in it. 15 million. It's conservative, legally speaking. You could probably fight for more, but this proposal has support from museums, governments, and victims' families. It's seen as fair." Thaddeus looked at Corinne. They'd had this conversation privately a dozen times. If money came, what would they do with it? They'd never needed much. "We want to help people," Corinne said slowly. "People like we were, elderly people facing homelessness." "That can absolutely be part of the Foundation's mission," Agent Morse said. "Housing security for seniors. We can build that into the structure." Over the next week, they reviewed the proposal with Bridger and a financial advisor Nell had recommended. The terms were generous and protective. They'd serve on the board, but wouldn't be burdened with day-to-day management. The foundation would be called the Calloway Recovery Project, named not to honor him, but to acknowledge the journey from theft to restoration. And their own financial security would be real, but not obscene. $15 million, invested conservatively, would ensure they never worried about money again. They could live comfortably, give generously, and focus on the work rather than survival. "What do you think?" Thaddeus asked Corinne one evening as they reviewed the final paperwork. "I think 6 months ago we were sleeping in your son's basement, wondering where we'd go when he threw us out. Now we're signing documents about foundations and millions. It doesn't feel real." "No," he agreed. "It doesn't. But the people we've met, Sarah and her family, the tribe elders, all those families getting back pieces of their history, they're real. The good we can do is real." She picked up a pen. "Let's sign it." They signed on July 3rd. The announcement was made on July 5th, after the holiday. Media coverage was extensive but shorter than previous waves. The world was moving on to other stories, and Thaddeus and Corinne were grateful to fade from headlines. The foundation was established with an initial endowment from museum commitments. Offices were opened in Chicago. A board was assembled. Art experts, legal specialists, indigenous representatives, and Thaddeus and Corinne. Their first board meeting was in August. They sat around a polished conference table in a building so modern it felt like another planet compared to their cabin. The executive director, a woman named Patricia Chen. "Wait," Thaddeus stopped. "Not Chen. We can't use Chen." "Why not?" Patricia asked, confused. "Just superstition. Could you use your middle name?" She shrugged. "Sure, Patricia Sullivan works." The meeting covered logistics. Which pieces would go where, how revenue would be distributed, what grants would be prioritized. But the most meaningful moment came at the end when Patricia Sullivan presented their first initiative. "We've identified 12 elderly individuals or couples currently facing housing insecurity. With the board's approval, we'd like to offer them emergency assistance, first month's rent, security deposits, basic furniture. We estimate we can house all 12 for under $30,000. "Do it," Corinne said immediately. The vote was unanimous. On the drive back to Montana, Corinne was quiet for a long time. Then she said, "We could have been one of those 12 people." "We were," Thaddeus corrected. "We are. We just got impossibly lucky." "Not lucky, grace. We received grace. Then we pass it on." By autumn, their lives had found a new rhythm. The cabin was truly theirs now, quiet again, surrounded by trees turning gold and red. They'd made improvements, new windows, proper insulation, a better heating system. The hidden basement had been sealed. They'd requested it, unable to live above that space without remembering. The opening was covered, the entrance removed. Whatever had been there was gone now, distributed to the world. They kept one thing, Calloway's final journal, the one with his confession and blessing. It sat on their mantel, a reminder of choices and consequences. Nell visited often, as did Bridger. Agent Morse stayed in touch, updating them on repatriations. They received letters weekly from people they'd never met, thanking them for returns they'd enabled. A museum in Prague, a family in Israel, a tribe in New Mexico. Each letter reminded them why they'd chosen the hard path. And slowly, carefully, they began to live again. Not the life they'd had before, that was gone, erased by loss and betrayal, but a new life, built on purpose rather than survival. They volunteered at the local shelter. They funded a program helping seniors with housing applications. They lived modestly in their improved cabin, wealthy on paper, but unchanged in practice. "Do you ever regret it?" Nell asked one evening over dinner. "All the attention, all the stress, all the legal battles. Do you wish you'd never opened that door?" Thaddeus and Corinne exchanged a look, the kind of wordless communication that comes from 5 decades together. "No," Corinne said finally, "because we learned something important." "What's that?" "That we were stronger than we thought, that doing right matters more than being comfortable, that even when the world takes everything from you, it can't take who you are unless you let it." She reached for Thaddeus's hand. "We lost our home, our savings, our son, but we found ourselves again, in that cabin, in that choice, in that impossible discovery. We found out we were still the people we'd always hoped to be." Thaddeus squeezed her hand, worth every sleepless night. As winter approached again, their first winter anniversary of moving into the cabin, they stood together on the porch, watching snow begin to fall. The flakes drifted down through the pines, soft and steady, covering the world in white. "A year ago we were terrified," Corinne said. "We were," Thaddeus agreed, "but we made it." "More than made it. We thrived." He pulled her close, both of them wrapped in heavy coats, their breath visible in the cold air. Somewhere far away, in museums and homes, the pieces they'd found were being appreciated by people who'd thought them lost forever. Somewhere, elderly people were moving into apartments funded by their foundation. Somewhere, their story was inspiring others to choose integrity over expedience. And here, in this small cabin in the Montana woods, 2 people who'd been cast aside as worthless had proved that dignity and honor weren't luxuries reserved for the wealthy. They were choices available to everyone, even, especially, those who had nothing left to lose but themselves. "Thank you," Corinne whispered. "For what?" "For being you, for standing with me, for not running when it got hard." Where else would I go? He kissed her forehead. You're my home, always have been. They stood together as darkness fell and the snow continued its quiet work, erasing footprints, covering scars, making the world new again. And in that moment, they knew with absolute certainty that they'd done something remarkable. Not because they'd found a fortune, but because they'd chosen to let it go. Because in the end, the treasure was never the art. It was always who they'd become in the process of giving it back. 2 years after that first snow, the cabin had become more than shelter. It had become a sanctuary. Thaddeus and Corinne had used a small portion of their settlement to make real improvements. The roof was solid now, replaced entirely by a local contractor who'd done the work at cost after hearing their story. The windows were double-paned, keeping out the brutal Montana winters. A proper heating system hummed efficiently in the basement, the sealed basement, now just empty space where secrets used to live. The garden Corinne had planted that first spring was flourishing. Tomatoes, beans, wildflowers that attracted hummingbirds and bees. She spent hours there in the warm months, her arthritic hands gentle with seedlings, her face peaceful in the sunshine. Thaddeus had built a workshop in the back. Nothing fancy, just a shed with good light and a solid workbench. He made furniture now, not for money but for purpose. Rocking chairs for the senior center, toy boxes for young families, bird houses he'd hang in the surrounding pines. They'd purchased the cabin outright from Garrison, who'd been stunned to learn what had been hidden there. "I could have been rich," he'd said when the story broke. Then he'd laughed. "But I'd have had to live with myself. You two did right. I'm proud I helped, even accidentally." He'd refused to accept more than the original value of the land, $12,000. The rest, he said, wouldn't feel clean. They stayed in touch. He'd join them for dinner sometimes, swapping stories about properties and people, about the strange ways life unfolds. But the biggest change wasn't the physical improvements. It was the purpose that now filled their days. The Callaway Recovery Project had grown beyond anyone's initial expectations. From that first grant helping 12 people, they'd expanded to assist over 800 elderly individuals across 17 states. The foundation didn't just provide housing deposits. They offered counseling, legal assistance, job placement, and something less tangible but equally important: dignity. Every person they helped received a handwritten note from Thaddeus and Corinne. "You matter. Your story isn't over. We believe in you." Simple words, but they landed with weight when you'd been discarded by society. The letters they received in return filled 3 boxes in their living room. Nell had suggested they throw them away, that keeping them all was excessive. But Corinne refused. "These are people," she'd say. "Every letter is a life. I won't throw away lives." So she read them, all of them, often with tears streaming down her face. A 72-year-old veteran who'd been living in his car, now in an apartment working part-time at a hardware store. An 80-year-old widow who'd lost her home to medical debt, now living near her grandchildren. A couple in their 80s who'd been sleeping in shelters, now renting a small house with a garden. Each story was a mirror of what could have been Thaddeus and Corinne's fate. Each life saved felt like paying forward the grace they'd received. The museum exhibitions were the foundation's most visible work. 56 pieces had been placed in institutions around the world, each accompanied by placards telling the full story. Stolen by Callaway, hidden for decades, discovered by chance, returned with intention. The exhibits drew massive crowds. People came not just to see priceless art, but to witness what redemption looked like in physical form. The Metropolitan Museum of Art in New York dedicated an entire wing to the Callaway Recovery Collection. The opening gala in October of their 3rd year was star-studded and strange. Celebrities and politicians mingled with art historians and the families who'd gotten pieces back. Thaddeus and Corinne were guests of honor, deeply uncomfortable in formal clothes neither had worn in decades. "I feel like a fraud," Thaddeus muttered, tugging at his tie. "You're the opposite of a fraud," Patricia Sullivan said, appearing beside them with champagne flutes. She'd become not just the foundation's director, but a true friend, navigating the complex world of non-profit management while keeping them informed and involved. "You're the most authentic people here." The evening's highlight came when they unveiled the centerpiece of the exhibition, the Vermeer that had been returned to Sarah Levine's family. Sarah had passed away 6 months after receiving the painting, but she'd lived long enough to see it, to touch it, to tell her great-grandchildren about the apartment in Amsterdam. The family had chosen to loan it to the museum so the world could see it, with all proceeds supporting Holocaust education. Her grandson, David, spoke at the unveiling. "My grandmother died whole," he said, his voice carrying across the packed gallery. "For 70 years, part of her was missing, stolen by hatred. Thaddeus and Corinne Monroe gave that part back. They didn't have to. They could have kept everything, sold it, become wealthy beyond measure. Instead, they chose to make other people whole. That's not just integrity, that's love." The applause was thunderous. Thaddeus and Corinne stood awkwardly, unused to such attention, uncomfortable with praise that felt too large for their small actions. But afterward, when the crowds dispersed and they stood alone in front of the Vermeer, Corinne whispered, "He's right, you know. It is love. That's what this whole thing has been about. Loving people enough to give them back what was taken. Even when it costs us everything," Thaddeus added. "Especially then." They returned home to Montana different than when they'd left. The gala had been beautiful but exhausting, a reminder that they didn't belong in that world of wealth and prestige. They belonged here, in their quiet cabin, with Nell dropping by unannounced and Bridger calling weekly to check in. They belonged with the hummingbirds in Corinne's garden and the smell of sawdust in Thaddeus's workshop. They belonged to a life that was small and meaningful, not large and hollow. Winter came again, as it always did. Their 4th winter in the cabin, but the first that felt truly comfortable. The heating worked. The pantry was stocked. They had warm clothes and a reliable vehicle. They'd even adopted a dog, an ancient golden retriever named Biscuit that Bridger had rescued from a shelter. The dog was arthritic and half-blind but devoted, spending his days by the fire, his nights sprawled across their bed. "We're collecting broken things," Thaddeus had joked when they brought him home. "We're giving broken things a soft place to land," Corinne had corrected. "There's a difference." In January, as snow piled high and temperatures dropped below zero, they received an unexpected letter. The return address was Portland, Oregon. Roland's handwriting. Thaddeus stared at the envelope for a full minute before opening it. Corinne watched from across the kitchen table, her hands wrapped around a mug of tea. "Do you want me to read it?" she offered. "No, we do this together." He opened it carefully. Inside was a single page, handwritten on lined paper. "Dear Mum and Dad," it began. "I don't expect you to read this. I don't expect forgiveness. I'm writing because my therapist says I need to take accountability and because I've spent 2 years trying to become someone you might not be ashamed of. I was cruel. Worse than cruel. I was selfish and blind. I threw you out when you needed me most because your presence reminded me of my own failures. That's not an excuse. It's just the truth. I've lost everything since then. My marriage, my kids' respect, my home, my career. And I deserved to lose it all. I'm working construction now, living in a 1-bedroom apartment that leaks when it rains. I'm broke and alone, and it's exactly what I deserve. But I'm also sober for the first time in 15 years. I'm in therapy 3 times a week. I'm volunteering at a homeless shelter every Saturday. I'm trying to understand how I became the kind of person who could hurt the people who gave me everything. I saw what you did with the art collection. I read every article. I watched the interviews. You could have been millionaires. You chose to give it away. You chose to help people like you were, people like I made you. And I realized you've always been who you are. It was me who changed. It was me who became small and cruel and broken. I don't expect you to respond to this letter. I don't expect anything. I just needed you to know that you were right about everything, and that somewhere in Oregon your son is trying, finally, pathetically, probably too late, to be worthy of parents like you. I love you. I'm sorry. Roland. Silence filled the kitchen. Biscuit whined softly from his bed by the fire. Corinne set down her tea with shaking hands. What do we do? Thaddeus folded the letter carefully. I don't know. They sat with it for days. Nell's advice was clear. He's manipulating you. Don't respond. Bridger was more measured. He might be genuine, but you don't owe him anything. Patricia Sullivan, who'd become a confidant, said, Whatever you do it for yourselves, not for him. But the decision wasn't about advice. It was about who they were, who they'd chosen to be when they'd opened that basement door and chosen honesty over profit. They were people who believed in redemption, even when it was hard, even when it hurt. So on a cold February morning, Corinne sat down and wrote back. Her letter was short. Roland, we received your letter. We're glad you're getting help. We're glad you're working to become better. We can't forget what you did. Forgiveness isn't something we can offer easily, but we can acknowledge your efforts. We can hope you find peace. If you want to write again, we'll read it. That's all we can promise right now. Mom and Dad. They sent it without knowing what would come back. A week later, Roland called. Thaddeus answered, his heart pounding. Hello? Dad? Roland's voice was thick with emotion. I got Mom's letter. I don't deserve it. Your kindness. I don't deserve any of it. Probably not, Thaddeus agreed. But we're not giving it because you deserve it. We're giving it because we're capable of it. There's a difference. Roland was quiet for a long moment. Can I ask you something? Yes. When you found all that art, all that money, how did you know what to do? How did you know to give it back? Thaddeus looked across the kitchen at Corinne, who was listening, tears in her eyes. Because we knew what it felt like to have things taken from us. We knew that injustice, even old injustice, still hurts. And we couldn't live with ourselves adding to that hurt, even if it made us rich. I took things from you, Roland whispered. Your dignity, your security. I took and never thought about what it cost you. Yes, you did. How do I fix that? You can't. Some things stay broken, Roland. What you can do is stop breaking new things. You can build something different going forward. Not for us, for yourself. Thaddeus paused. Your mother and I, we didn't find treasure in that basement. We found a choice, and that choice defined us. You're facing your own choice now. Define yourself by it. They talked for 30 minutes. Not about reconciliation, not about forgiveness, but about accountability and change. When they hung up, Corinne joined Thaddeus at the table. Do you think he means it? I think he wants to mean it. Whether he follows through, we'll see. But at least now he has a chance. Do we want him back in our lives? Thaddeus considered carefully. Not the way it was. That's gone. But maybe someday, something new, something honest. We'll see. Roland wrote every month after that. His letters were raw and unflinching, detailing his therapy, his struggles with sobriety, his attempts to rebuild relationships with his children. Thaddeus and Corinne responded to each one, not with warmth exactly, but with acknowledgement. They were witnessing his journey without promising destination. It was all they could offer, and Roland seemed to understand. Thank you for not giving up on me, he wrote in June. Even when I gave up on you, even when I gave up on myself. By their 5th year in the cabin, the Callaway Recovery Project had helped over 2,000 people. The foundation had expanded its mission beyond housing, creating programs for job training, healthcare navigation, and legal assistance for elderly individuals facing exploitation. Museums around the world housed pieces from the collection, generating revenue that funded all of it. The impact was measurable and meaningful. But for Thaddeus and Corinne, the most profound changes were personal. Corinne had started painting. Nothing professional, just watercolors she'd work on in the afternoons, sitting in the garden or by the window. Flowers mostly, and birds, and occasionally the cabin itself, trying to capture what it meant to find home after losing everything. Nell had encouraged her to display them at a local art fair. She'd sold 3, using the money to buy art supplies for the senior center. "You're an artist now," Nell had teased, officially. "I'm an old woman with a brush," Corinne had replied. "But it makes me happy. That's art enough." Thaddeus had taken up teaching. The local community college asked him to lead a woodworking class one semester. He'd agreed reluctantly and discovered he loved it. His students ranged from teenagers to retirees, all of them learning to see potential in raw wood, to build something beautiful from nothing. "That's what life is," he'd tell them. "Finding the grain, working with what you've got, creating something that matters." His class waiting list was now 6 months long. They'd also become advocates. When Montana proposed cutting funding for senior services, they'd testified at the state capitol, their story lending weight to budget discussions. When a national news program did a segment on elder poverty, they'd participated using their platform to highlight systemic issues. They were reluctant public figures, but they understood the responsibility that came with their unusual story. People listened to them, so they chose their words carefully, always pointing not to themselves, but to the thousands still struggling. "We got lucky," Corinne would say in interviews. "Impossibly, absurdly lucky. But luck shouldn't be what saves people. Policy should. Compassion should. We need a country where elderly people don't have to find hidden treasure to survive. We need a country that values its elders enough to house them, to care for them, to honor them." The interviews always ended the same way, with Thaddeus and Corinne returning to their cabin, exhausted and relieved to be home, to be anonymous again in the woods where the only audience was trees and birds and one aging dog. "I'm tired of being a symbol," Thaddeus said after one particularly long press day. "Then we'll stop," Corinne replied simply. "We've done enough, more than enough. We can just live now." And that's what they did. In the 6th year, they largely withdrew from public life. The foundation ran itself, expertly managed by Patricia Sullivan and a dedicated staff. The museum exhibits continued without their input. The press stopped calling, and Thaddeus and Corinne settled into something they'd never really had before: peace. Not the peace of having nothing to lose, which had characterized their first winter in the cabin, but the peace of having built something meaningful and being able to rest in it. They took walks every morning, Biscuit limping along behind them, all 3 of them moving slower but still moving. They played cards in the evenings, Corinne usually winning, Thaddeus usually pretending he'd let her. They read books aloud to each other, trading off chapters, arguing about characters like they were real people. They cooked together, experimenting with recipes Nell brought over, sometimes succeeding, often failing, always laughing. And once a month, they'd drive into Timber Falls for the Foundation's community dinner. They'd funded it in their 3rd year, a free meal for anyone who needed it, served with dignity in the community center. They'd volunteer, serving food, washing dishes, sitting with people who were living the life they'd barely escaped. "That could have been us," Corinne would whisper every single time. "It was us," Thaddeus would remind her. "We're just on the other side now, temporarily." "You think we could lose it all again?" "I think everything's temporary. Money, comfort, even life. But who we are, that's what lasts. That's what matters." On their 7th anniversary of living in the cabin, Nell organized a surprise party. The community center was packed with people they'd helped, either directly through the foundation or indirectly through their story. Children from Thaddeus's woodworking classes, elderly individuals now housed and stable, museum staff who'd worked on the exhibitions. Even Agent Morse came, retired now but still invested in their well-being. Patricia Sullivan had prepared a video montage, news clips from their discovery, footage of art being returned to families, interviews with people whose lives the foundation had changed, and photos of Thaddeus and Corinne through the years, aging but glowing with purpose. When it ended, there wasn't a dry eye in the room. "We didn't do this for recognition," Corinne said when asked to speak. Her voice shook but held steady. "We did it because it was right, because we knew what it felt like to be forgotten, because we'd been given a choice and we chose to believe that people matter more than profit, that doing good matters more than doing well." She looked at Thaddeus beside her. "We didn't find treasure 7 years ago. We found ourselves. We found out we were still the people we'd always hoped to be. And that's worth more than all the art in the world." The applause was long and loud, but what moved them most came after, when person after person approached to share their stories. A woman in her 70s who'd been homeless 3 years ago, now running a small business. A veteran who'd been living in his car, now mentoring other vets through housing transitions. A couple in their 80s who'd lost everything in a medical bankruptcy, now volunteering at the shelter where they'd once stayed. Each person was proof that circumstances don't define character, that people given a chance usually rise to meet it, that dignity, once restored, ripples outward in ways impossible to measure. Driving home that night, Thaddeus and Corinne were quiet for a long time. Then Corinne said, "Do you remember what Garrison said when he gave us the key? He said some things are better left alone." "I remember." He was wrong. Some things need to be found, need to be brought into the light, even when it's hard, especially when it's hard. Thaddeus pulled into their driveway. The cabin lights glowed warm against the darkness. 7 years ago, this place had been a last resort, a desperate gamble against winter. Now it was home in the deepest sense, not just shelter, but the physical manifestation of who they'd become. "We did good," he said simply. "We did." They sat in the car a moment longer, neither wanting to break the spell. Then Biscuit barked from inside, demanding dinner, and they laughed and went into their small, warm, miraculous life. Months passed into seasons, seasons into years. Thaddeus turned 85, Corinne turned 83. Their bodies slowed further, but their spirits remained strong. The foundation continued its work, now helping thousands annually. The art collection had been fully distributed, each piece finding its rightful home. And in Timber Falls, Montana, an elderly couple lived quietly, their extraordinary story fading into legend while they simply existed in the grace of ordinary days. One afternoon in early autumn, as Corinne worked in her garden and Thaddeus built a bookshelf for the library, a young reporter from a podcast called. She was doing a retrospective on the Callaway discovery, marking its 10th anniversary. "I know you've stopped giving interviews," she said, "but I'm interested in the human story, not the art, not the money. How did this experience change who you are?" Thaddeus almost declined, but something in her voice, genuine curiosity rather than sensationalism, made him pause. "We're who we've always been," he said. "We just had the chance to prove it." "But surely having millions of dollars changed things." "The money's nice. It means we're comfortable, that we can help others, that we never have to worry about winter again. But it didn't change us. If anything, the experience stripped away everything false and left only what mattered: integrity, compassion, each other." "Do you think you'd do it again, knowing what you know now? All the stress, all the legal battles, all the loss of privacy?" Thaddeus looked out the window at Corinne, her hands in the soil, her face peaceful in afternoon light. "Yes," he said without hesitation, "because the alternative was living on top of other people's pain and pretending we didn't know. We couldn't do that, wouldn't do that. We'd rather face every difficulty than compromise who we are." "That's beautiful," the reporter said softly. "That's just life," Thaddeus replied. "Real life, the kind where choices matter and character costs something." The podcast aired 2 weeks later. Thaddeus and Corinne listened together, their voices strange coming through speakers, their story compressed into 40 minutes. But the reporter had captured something true, that this wasn't about art or money. It was about two people who'd been tested and chosen integrity. "She made us sound heroic," Corinne said when it ended. "We're not heroes, we just did what we could with what we had." Maybe that's what heroes are. Corinne took his hand. Ordinary people making extraordinary choices because it's right. They sat in comfortable silence as darkness fell. Outside, the first snow of the season began to fall, soft and steady. Inside, the fire crackled, Biscuit snored from his bed, and two people who'd survived winter after winter, both literal and metaphorical, rested in the warmth they'd built through honesty, courage, and an unwavering commitment to doing good, even when it cost everything. Their story wasn't over. Stories never really are. But this chapter had reached its natural end, not with wealth or fame, but with peace. The kind of peace that comes from knowing you looked into darkness and chose light, from knowing you had the chance to take and chose to give, from knowing that when the world stripped everything away, you found something more valuable than any treasure. Yourself, intact and uncompromised, still capable of love, still committed to justice, still worthy of the life you'd been given a second chance to live. Anyone can choose integrity when it's convenient. Thaddeus and Corinne Munro chose it when it cost them everything and gave them more than they'd ever imagined. Not in money, but in meaning. Not in comfort, but in character. Not in ease, but in the unshakable knowledge that they'd lived according to their deepest values and helped heal a world that so desperately needed healing. As snow continued to fall outside their warm cabin, covering the ground in white, erasing footprints and starting fresh, they understood something profound. Redemption isn't about finding treasure. It's about becoming worthy of what you find. It's about looking at something valuable and asking not what it can do for you, but what you can do with it for others. It's about transformation that happens not through luck, but through choice. They'd been cast out in winter, elderly and forgotten, and accepted a cabin everyone else called worthless. Beneath its floors, they'd found $280 million in stolen art. But what they really found was something priceless. Proof that honor and compassion aren't luxuries reserved for the wealthy. Their choices available to everyone, even those who have nothing left to lose but themselves. And sometimes, especially then, those choices matter most. The end. Up next, 2 more powerful stories are waiting for you. Click to keep discovering what happens when ordinary people face extraordinary choices. And don't forget to hit subscribe if you believe integrity still matters, that doing right is worth the cost, and that the truest wealth is measured not in what we keep, but in what we give away.